Great to see you back in this room. This is only the second time that we've done a recording here of our show here with an audience like you since COVID. So I'm feeling a little nervous, a little rusty. Been recording the last 2 years from my closet at home. So it's nice to be here with you. A lot has happened in that time. Climate has accelerated. Looks like we may have some real exciting policy developments coming shortly. We'll talk about that a little bit today with Joan and John. And our audience has grown significantly during COVID. Our weekly audience, people listening to our radio show and podcast, has gone from 50,000 a week to 150,000 a week. And we're now on the radio in Houston, the energy capital of the country, they would say the world. So we're excited about that. We plan to record our show here about once or twice a month with a live audience. Other times I'm still going to be in the closet. And on September 7th, we'll be here with Molly Wood from, some of you know her from Marketplace. She did a fantastic podcast called How We Survive. And she's going to be here talking about her story, her personal story. She's now a venture capitalist. And the story she's covered. So that's September 7th right here with Molly. Now tonight, Joan Blades and John Gable and I will record a conversation for our audience, which is partly why our chairs are oriented this way. We will have a chance to include your questions. There are question cards near you. Please write your question there. Put your name legibly on your card, and Megan, one of our producers, will collect the cards, and then I will call people up to go to the microphone in the middle in a particular order to share your question for Joan and John. If you need help keeping your question brief, we're here for you. So please welcome Joan Blades and John Gable to Climate One. Great to see you. Have a seat.
The fist.
Oh yeah, fist bump. There we go. Yes, we're doing
okay.
fist bumps. Yeah. We were hugging backstage, but we're fist bumping out here. Yes. Well, thanks for joining us for this live stream conversation, Bridging the Great American Divide with Joan Blades, co-founder of Living Room Conversations, and John Gable, co-founder of allsides.com. We're recording today's conversation for the Climate One radio show and podcast that drops every Friday. You can subscribe wherever you get your pods. For those watching online, you can submit your questions today in the comments section of the live stream, and we'll aim to get to them to the end. So John and Joan, welcome. It's great to see you both. I've seen your TED Talk and feel like, here we are. Joan, let's begin in 2004. For those of us who can remember 2004, George Bush was running for re-election against John Kerry. Climate is a future and often distant concern for many people. You were curious why you weren't hearing more about climate from your friends on the right. So what did you do?
Well, I am from Berkeley, California, and I'm a co-founder of MoveOn.org, so I didn't have a lot of friends on the right, and I was truly curious about what's going on. This is a shared planet, and if climate's really the issue it sounded like it was, it seemed like this was something we should be able to talk about and really get to work on. And that was when I started working with a group called Reuniting America and had the beginning of many conversations and made friendships, across the political spectrum, with leadership of the Christian Coalition, Grover Norquist, and I learned a lot. It was really productive. What was very disturbing is by 2008 or 2009, it was harder to have a good conversation about climate across the political spectrum. And that was, in fact, the inspiration for doing Living Room Conversations, because coming from Move On, I really believe in the importance and power of grassroots engagement. And there's a question, do the leaders lead or do the leaders follow the people's needs? It's a foundation that you've got to create.
And you went to, some point in there, you went to Midland, Texas on a golden fracking tour with Mark Meckler, founder of the Tea Party Patriots.
True. That is only the terminology I've used for it. I did go to Midland, Texas with Mark to meet a friend of his who does fracking and to better understand. Because we had a wonderful conversation in 2013 about crony capitalism. And during that conversation, we discovered we had a living room conversations is two friends, each invite two friends for a specifically shaped conversation with a first round where you get to know each other, a second round with questions about your personal relationship with the topic, and a third round with just reflection and next steps. After having agreed to certain behaviors, basically what you learned in kindergarten, take turns, be respectful, own your part of the conversation, people are good at it. And Mark and I had been introduced by a friend of mine, because that Move On's co-founder of Tea Party Patriots, what a good idea. And we talked and decided ultimately that, yeah, we'd do this. He brought two of his friends. I had two of my friends. We had a very diverse group. And we were in complete agreement about certain things about the financial system and criminal justice system. You know, too many people in prison, war on drugs is not a success, got to use evidence-based practices. And then we said, yeah, this is so great. Let's have another conversation. Fracking was a huge deal in 2014. And we discovered very quickly that his facts and my facts were very different. And you can't have a good conversation when your facts are, you know, completely unaligned. And so the Golden Fracking Tour, which was my own title for it, was to go and meet with a friend of his that had a company that did fracking and other experts, so that some of experts that I trusted and experts he trusted, what are the questions that we need to have answered so that communities can have that conversation about fracking? Because if you don't have shared facts, then power and money are going to own the decision instead of letting people decide about what they want happening in their own community.
Right, there's a lot to unpack there. Facts and persuasion. What people often want to just jump in and start persuading people and you know, spewing facts. John, you grew up in a coal mining town and worked in Silicon Valley in the early days of the commercial internet. You know, how much did you think and talk about climate change growing up and in your early tech career? Did you at all?
Well, I think that coming from that area in Kentucky, most of our experiences with people, environmentalists, we weren't talking about climate change that much in the 80s or the 70s, was actually not as positive as you might not be surprised by. But it was less about that, oh, they're not naturalists. I mean, these are people, and I grew up where we were planting trees and living
hunting out
Daniel
in
Boone. I'm not a hunter myself, but friends of mine are. And so nature is very much part of our lives. But we also saw like the state government come in and shut down a private lumber entrepreneur, had his own little lumber business with a deed from the United States government. But the state government decided you shouldn't do this, and they kicked him out. He didn't have the money or the legal support to protect himself, even though he was just one guy. And we all have lots of different stories of really overreach. And when we hear about gas prices being taxed or gasoline being taxed, I think when I'm in Silicon Valley, we have all sorts of different options. We're all pretty well off. I've been fortunate. It doesn't impact my life that much. But if you're middle class, if you're really kind of struggling to get by, those gas taxes are a huge deal.
Yeah.
And actually, this is one of the things where I'm very much in agreement with Bernie Sanders. That's something he was concerned about as well, about how that particular approach to dealing with climate actually put most of the weight on the poorest in our society, or the people who didn't. It was a regressive tax.
Sure.
And so lots of our experiences when I was younger was a little bit more about the overreach side, where we're just trying to get through our days and our lives, and then people from outside of our state and DC are telling us all these things, and all we see are people losing their jobs or being shut down. And so that puts the people who are generally considered environmentalists on a very non-credible. And it seems sometimes from that world that they're kind of maybe arrogant, but definitely kind of cruel in just these things are good ideas, let's do them. And in Kentucky, we're not sure if they really make a difference, but we feel the pain.
Yeah, sometimes people think environmentalists, particularly the coastal environmentalists, are elitist.
Yeah.
Yeah, maybe not that in tune with rural, gas prices for people who drive long distances in rural America. Joan, you mentioned that 2008, 10 was things started to change. What do you see as the story of climate the last 10 or 12 years? What's the narrative? If you think back to that time, 2008, Obama and McCain ran basically in the same place on climate change. 2010, things, the midterms, Tea Party, things really changed. How do you see the story?
Well, politically, the story of climate was it became one of the polarization points, which is kind of a tragedy. When, in fact, what I've seen over the last 10 years is the opportunities have totally changed. The cost of clean energy is less than the cost of oil. We can do clean energy so much more effectively. It's good for the local community, good for the global community. And, it was sort of like that conversation I had with Mark and his friends. We were really surprised by how much we agree. And at this point, I think our division is causing us to not see how much we agree. There are huge opportunities, and we are just not grabbing them because we're so caught in this fight.
And John, this is painful for you because you think that there's more agreement on climate than a lot of other things.
So much more agreement on climate than most issues. A large majority of Republicans do believe in climate change, do believe its impact that's man-made, do believe it's impacting our lives. Huge majority agree with some of the specific solutions, like planting 1 trillion trees, or actually using tax credits and other types of financial measures to encourage better behavior. There is a lot of agreement there. And I think that's actually what we need to focus on. I mean, the political class who get elected by saying we're better than those guys do not emphasize common ground. Common ground's boring for press. It's not good clickbait. And actually, if you're trying to raise money as an environmental group, saying, hey, we agree with the other side isn't necessarily the best way to raise money. Telling your contributors that the other side is evil, they're terrible and awful, that's the easier way to raise money. And so there's a lot of opportunities here to actually work together and focus on the planet. I think all of us who really believe in this issue, or any issue, if you will, we have to decide what's more important to us, being right about that issue, or actually the impact, solving the problem. So if you hear me or somebody you're talking with saying, hey, I agree, let's plant 1 trillion trees, let's do financial incentives to have cleaner air. And I also say, I don't think the climate is as big of an issue as you do. I think there are other issues that are more important to me. So if you stop and listen to that and think about how we might respond to that person. If your tendency is to respond by saying, oh, the climate is really bad, you're not paying attention to these things, and that thing about the UN saying that some of these scenarios aren't likely to happen, that's one approach. The other approach is, do you want to plant 1 trillion trees? Do you want to do financial incentives? Let me help you do that. Let me introduce you to groups that want to do that. I will help you do that. The first response of saying what they're wrong about is really about me or us being right. And my gosh, we love being right. All of us do. We're human beings. We like being right. But does that really save the planet? If it's more important to you to solve the problem, to address climate change, I recommend the other approach, finding the common ground, seeing where you agree, and working together to make it real.
And a variation of that I've heard is, you want to be right or you want to be in relationship. And many
That's good.
people, like that's like, ooh, the relationship, right? So Joan, how does that, when you're talking with people who have different views than you, is there a little voice that in you that wants to like spring facts or counter or go, no, counter them? Or do you think, oh, this is my friend, I'm going to be quiet and listen and, bite my lip?
Well, I'm not biting my lip these days. I mean, what's been really great about this is making friends like John, who I am curious. Why are we seeing things? John's brilliant. John is someone I really trust at a deep level. And when we disagree, it causes me to look at what I'm thinking, what I believe, and where are the holes in it? Why do we see things differently? This stuff is confusing. I mean, it's not that it makes life simpler. It's really easy when you got black and white, but we don't. And there's actually a lot of colors in this whole system too.
And you say that there's, research shows that people make gut judgments about people and our brains follow. So what does that mean? And that's contrary to often people say, oh, it's not rational. We got to be rational. We got to be optimal.
Yeah, people keep on thinking we're rational beings. And it's a nice fiction, but over 90% of the time, if you look at the science, over 90% of the time, we're doing it by gut. And then our reason follows. We rationalize why we made the right decision. And that's human. So, with my dear friend in Utah, when we started becoming friends, climate wasn't on his list of concerns. And it got on his list of concerns, not because I'm a brilliant presenter on climate, but because he cares about me.
Wow, he cares about the climate because he cares about you and you care about climate.
Yes, and another friend of his, he has two people that he feels close to, and we really care. And I care about him being concerned about being, put in a position of being isolated and othered. We care about the people we love and what they care about, and that's good. So whereas talking about climate change is really important, talking and having relationships across differences is critical also. And we need to do it en masse, not just, we have people that we've cut ourselves off from.
And it just seems, John, that so many conversations when people care about something, they try to persuade in one conversation over one beer or one meal. And so how do you approach, is persuasion and persuasive, or are there other ways to connect with people?
Well, Joan has completely convinced me and brought me on board with the relationships first piece. And when she and I first met, friends of us introduced us, and we were walking around on a walk in Reston, Virginia, on some parking lot. And I always say that if Joan Blades asks you to go on a walk, go on that walk, because it was transformative for me at least. And when we found that we were
Did you trust her? She's this founder of this liberal moveon.org thing. Did you trust her?
I never lived in a place where most people agree with me, so I'm not, that doesn't bother me. I'm a Republican in San Francisco who worked for Mitch McConnell, so I'm really popular here. So that's not unusual for me. And I'm actually, I love discovering people. I love finding that kind of brightness in them. It's just something I've learned being from Kentucky and also being in both poor areas and then very wealthy, affluent areas, and going back and forth to like Bar Harbor, Maine, and coal mining Kentucky. I learned at an early age how people can other others, whether it's people without wealth othering those people with fortune or vice versa. And you begin to get a good sense of real character and not being caught up in the kind of covering of the book or the stereotypes. And so it was very obvious to me what anybody who meets Joan, it's not hard at all to recognize the sincerity and intelligence and just solid person she is. And we discovered that we were working on the same thing. I came from the technology side. 25 years ago when I worked at Netscape, a team lead for Netscape Navigator, or the product managers. And 25 years ago, I gave a speech saying how I thought the internet might actually train us to discriminate against each other in new ways. How I thought it might actually, as it evolved, divide us. And that was concerning because those of us who are working in technology, those of us who stayed up obscene hours, we wanted to create this thing that made it possible for us to all have better information, to make better decisions.
It was going to democratize information.
You can make better decisions on everything in life. And we would know people as individuals around the world because we connect with them on things like Zoom today and really get to know them. That was the dream of those of us working crazy. And in a lot of ways, the internet's done that. But when there's a lot of money or a lot of politics or a lot of power involved, it's doing the exact opposite. And so when we started AllSides and AllSides.com 10 years ago, as I started creating technologies, what I was describing was the internet's broken. It's not doing what it was intended to do. And that's both scary, but also kind of good news, because that's technology. We can change that. The business models around it, we can change those. But whether they speak to our better angels inside of ourselves, or whether they pull out the worst of us, that's what we have to develop and focus upon.
And I think it's fascinating that AllSides actually uses humans in that. When I saw it, I was like, oh, they've got these algorithms that are defining it's for those who don't, it's a site that sort of compares side by side the headlines and narratives on the left, the center, and the right. And they're labeled LL, C, RR. And I thought, oh, there must be some algorithms that's doing that. But you've got humans, which I find fabulously reassuring.
And I am a technologist, but I do think people get carried away with AI or algorithms, because all algorithms mean is that somebody you don't know behind a closed door decided what was important, and then they wrote the computer to decide that. So they are biased. They are biased by whoever wrote them. And we were very interested in coming up with a system that was not endangered by our own biases. I mean, all sides, we have people on the left and right and everything in between. We joke that we have never had food fights, although occasionally some of our arguments get a little bit heated. But we consciously have people across the board, but that's not good enough. And journalists who really work hard to present news fairly, they're just doing it inside themselves. We all are biased. We all live in bubbles. We cannot rely just on ourselves to be fair or balanced or see the world evenly. So we created a system based on American people all across the nation to be able to take a look at different things, and we reflect what they would see. And we use that not so much to say, oh, you news media, you're left or you're right. We use it mainly as a way to enable all of us to quickly see different perspectives on the same issue, on the same news. Because the idea of technology, from my point of view, is to enable human beings to do what we do best. Think for ourselves, decide for ourselves, connect with other people. Technology is to serve that, not replace that.
So we are at a moment right now where there's the Inflation Reduction Act. Could be, some are saying that it's the biggest investment in clean energy and climate ever. What are the narratives? And I want to get Joan on this. Like, what are the narratives now? This thing, is it good for people, low-income people, et cetera? What are the narratives around this Inflation Reduction Act?
Well, as any big thing, you got all narratives involved in this one. You have everybody left, center, right agreeing with different things, different pieces. There was something I thought that really stuck out to me when I was looking at the details of it. I mentioned how Bernie Sanders was concerned about taxing
Gasoline's regressive.
Yeah. And what I noticed in this bill was that they didn't increase gas taxes, but they did increase credits for both used and new electric vehicles. And I always thought that made more sense, because that's when people are actually making financial decisions. And that's where it can really help people. And you can do that in a way that doesn't penalize the people with less money. And in my mind, that kind of common sense, sensible, talking back and forth between different sides happened behind closed doors, not in the spotlight. Most of the best bridging activities happen in relationship, in quiet voices with people working to solve a problem, not on the spotlights, not when pundits are talking on TV, but through a relationship. And that's where our opportunity for change really is.
Right. So the gas tax is not a big part of this proposal. It's incentivizing EVs and used EVs, even a good thing, and incentivizing heat pumps, et cetera. Joan, a lot of people on the left are cautiously really excited about this opportunity. We're in this once in a 10-year window. What are you hearing from your liberal and conservative friends about this moment in climate policy?
There's, I think my friends that are conservative are much like John, so that's positive. And on the left, I'm hearing, well, there's some things that 20% bad, but
of course they're picking at the little thing. Yes, of course they're
but
picking
80% good. It's really important. Mm-hmm. So that's kind of progress for us to have both sides saying good things. Now, when you look at the living room conversations and the work I do, you don't get the far left or the far right showing up. It's, the 80% or more that are interested in talking across differences and hearing from the other. Because if you really, it's like, it's my way or the highway, this probably isn't the practice. But there is social science that suggests that if we can get 3.5% of the population serious about this kind of work, we can create culture change. And if we want to deal with climate, we're going to have to take one step at a time, and we're going to have to be working together with everybody's best ideas in the room and the agility to do more of what's working and stop doing what's not. And that doesn't happen when you're in a constant fight to show that you're right and they're wrong or whatever.
And a lot of that, you're part of you educated me about this bridging movement, this whole idea of bridging and rather than polarizing. And I think a lot of that is the frames people use and the language they use. So Joe, when you're talking to your conservative friends, in Berkeley where you live, people talk about planet and Earth, and others talk about markets and other jobs. So how are you careful about the language you use to try to use the other person's more familiar, more comfortable language?
Absolutely. And we have over 150 living room conversation guides, from topics like trust to guns and responsibility. And depending on what you're interested in. When I started living room conversations, it was to be about climate and energy. And we rapidly learned we should just have an energy conversation because people that don't believe in climate aren't coming to a climate and energy.
Yeah, but energy, you can get them in. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And the people that care about climate, they'll hear about that in the process. Over time, I've come to believe that have a conversation about anything. It's that relationship and starting to soften these boundaries that we've been creating between each other that's most important. I mean, talking about the technology, there is a thing about algorithms that's really problematic because with Facebook and all these different platforms, if it causes anger, fear, anxiety, it's more likely to get shared, and the algorithm is to get maximum profit, which is maximum sharing. So we have to become intentional about what we are taking in. That's why I love all sides, because that's a way of saying, actually, I want to see the full picture. And all sides is being used in schools in every state of the union, because for teachers, if a teacher shows one article, they are at risk of being attacked by parents for bias. But with all sides, it's like, it's all there, it's okay.
So you're a safe thing. John, do you think that some of your liberal friends are too shrill and over worried about climate?
Interesting. I'm actually not. I think everybody's in one issue or the other. There's always people who are too shrill or too worried on any issue. I don't know if that's fair. It's interesting. I don't really think about it that way. I do think that a lot of people on the right do think folks go too far in that direction.
Alarmist. Oh, it's not as bad, the climate. Oh, yeah.
And they lose a little credibility when they kind of push some things like, but I think that there's always a debate on any issue on different sides on what's the solution. There are always people who be a little bit more extreme. I think that's always going to happen, particularly in an open society like ours. You have different extremes arguing different pieces. I think the real question is what works? What do we do? And Joan mentioned that 3.5% of people, 75% of Americans would prefer news that's not slanted one way or the other, or 78%, my apologies, from Pew Research. And that's a big change from just 2 years before that, where it was in the 60s. We have 3.5% of the people of America being engaged in some kind of idea for a movement to succeed. If you're only talking about voters, that's like 5.5 million people, or a little over 10 million people if you're just talking about adults. That's a very achievable number. This is not like just something we threw out there. We're talking specifically about how to engage that number of people in ways that really solve problems. Because when you get the number of people engaged, culture changes, policy changes. And the fact that there are some people who may be more shrill or one way on the extremes on either side of the issue, I try not to be disrespectful about it, but to some extent, they don't really matter. The people who matter are the ones who are trying to solve the problem, who are truly listening to each other to solve the problem, to avoid the pitfalls of either extreme. And there's even a lot of evidence that suggests that doesn't suggest, but shows repeatedly that if you get a room full of just experts, and you get another room of experts and novices who don't know anything about the topic, and you give them the same problem, the room with a mixture of experts and novices will get the right answer right 90% more often than the pure experts. So we need to be challenged. It's amazing to me how everybody says trust the experts and trust the data, but the data says that needs to be challenged by people who aren't experts in order to be more effective.
Diversity of thought leads to better...
Exactly. And so if you really believe in the data, you got to commit to the processes that work to lead to better solutions, which includes open conversation with people who disagree with us, who aren't experts in the area, in order to get the better solution decided and acted upon. And that's our opportunity. And it's a very real thing. This is not just little kind of, oh, this is nice. Those are real numbers that we can achieve. And we're building technology not just in terms of sharing news, but how to have thousands and tens of thousands of hundreds of thousands of people to meet online in a video format using a living room conversations type guide so that they do what I like to describe as accidentally discovering the humanity of the other person.
So one of the things that's exciting, COVID caused us not to be here for a couple of years, but we've got tens of millions of people that are really comfortable having conversations by Zoom now. We have a problem with local connection. You also have a problem with national trust and connection. It would be possible if people were ready to show up. And we've had sister city and sister faith community conversations. We could do this at a massive level if people wanted to. Now, what makes this harder than what I did with my, folks years ago with Move On is you just signed a petition, you wrote a sentence about why, you wanted to censure and move on. This requires showing up.
Well, relationships are harder. They take a lot of time, and they're kind of messy, and you get vulnerable. So,
but they're great.
And we have
wonderful.
A problem with loneliness in this country.
Yes,
and isolation and belonging. So it's the answer as well as the hard thing.
It's both the hard thing and what everybody in the nation and the world who are feeling alone are craving. We are wired to be tribal. We are wired to go against each other. We're also wired and needing connection. And connection across differences means that I can show you who I really am rather than what I'm supposed to be according to the TikTok videos or whatever that has to be, which really damages us psychologically. So yes, it takes more work, but it is really, as Joan points out, fun and much more fulfilling at a deeper level. That we as society need this. Even outside of climate change, we as a society need to learn how to connect and disagree in order to share who we really are and be more fulfilled as human beings and healthier.
Last year, a book was written called The Power of Strangers, just about, Joe Keohane wrote it, and it just all this data about how we're better off when we talk to strangers. We have fears about that, and we have to overcome them, but we're happier, we're healthier. It brings our day up. And so this is actually creating a context where we shift the story so that we're people that talk to strangers. But the beauty of the one form of living room conversations was it was two friends, each invite two friends. So it's that personal invitation. You get to meet a couple strangers, you get to see a couple friends, and then you have a conversation that goes deeper than it otherwise would. A lot of people during COVID used the conversation guides to take care of family. And, one mom said, it was great. I got to know my nephews in ways I never would have otherwise. They live in another state, and I got to take care of my mother. She lived in another state. And so it can connect families, it can connect old high school friends. Sometimes people have done it that way, but it's being intentional.
Yeah, actually, we'll share a recent example that I personally have of this. I live in the Bay Area in a liberal bubble, and I recently, joined a group of people who are more politically conservative than I am, and it was kind of awkward and uncomfortable at first, and like, ooh, do I dare what I say? Can I really show what I think? And over time, became more personal, get to know them, not about persuasion or counter-arguing or countering. I had to put that aside, and now we have some really good connections, and people who I thought oh my, my earlier self was like, oh my God, he just said that, label that person. Oh, you're talking about critical race theory and the government's all stupid and inefficient. And pretty soon some time passes and we're talking about, renewable energy and some things like, oh, you're not so bad. You're not the devil that I thought you were 15 minutes ago. And it was I'm not just, patting myself on the back. I'm just sharing an example of intentionally going into space to be uncomfortable for that relationship-based diversity of thought, and I'm finding it quite rewarding, and it takes time. But John, in the political system, however, I hear that we're wired for this, we need this, and the business and political incentives are all going toward the extremes for the clicks and the primary wins. So what does that mean? We have to change culture first?
Well, we're seeing in a lot of hard data, a real rebellion against that. So Churchill's old quote was, America will always do the right thing after it's tried everything else. I think we've been trying everything else recently. And now we're going, that's not working. And there is a shift. There's over 5,000 organizations nationwide, according to something that Princeton did, that are focused on bridging divides. Mm-hmm. The demand for something other than the pundits yelling at each other is real. Even news organizations, such as CNN and many others, are now saying, you know what, maybe we were too extreme, maybe we need to change it so we actually hear the other side more. And they don't do that unless customers are going, hey, there's a problem here. I like to be idealized into saying we're all doing it for the good reason, but I think that when big businesses start making changes, it's because there's somebody clanging with some dollars for that.
Yeah.
And all the data showing a big pushback against that. We do want something better. We did try something that didn't work that well. And a lot of us on all sides, on left and right, I don't mean, no pun intended, but on left and right, we're seeing that the problems aren't being solved. And when you're not heard long enough and your problems that matter the most aren't being addressed, we tend to get angry. We tend to elect more extreme people to solve the problem. When that doesn't work, we try something else. We're going to keep trying until we solve it. And so I think we're learning as a nation that the real extremes are not helping that much.
And one of the big obstacles, Joan, seems to be judgment. There's so much judgment, and obviously this manifests, and I've been, thinking about judgment and trying to be less judgmental of myself and others. You've said that there's purity tests are a problem on the left. Can you explain that?
Actually, John said that.
Oh, I was going to blame you.
But I think I could probably agree that
Well, I think it's
I
solved
mean, it's
a
easier
problem.
for John to say there's a purity test on the left, but it's harder for someone on a side to say my side is righteous and pure. And I'll say that
It happens on the right too. There are purity tests. There's a lot of wanting to be right and being morally superior to the other side. You see that on the left, you see that on the right. And the more and more that happens, the more and more we divide and the less we're capable of solving problems. And I mean, whether it's back during working with after terrorist attacks, one of the things we had to do is not have a purity test that you're Muslim or not. We can't work with you if you are. That was an unhealthy purity test. For climate change, well, you want to help us on this, but, oh, you voted for Trump or you thought this or that, well, we can't work with you.
you work for a fossil company or something.
Yes, and actually some of the most successful groups, one of our friends, Bill Shireman, who works with, runs In This Together and Future 500, they work with corporations on the left and right and advocates and nonprofits and schools, all these different stakeholders across differences to really focus on problem solving, to solve that problem. They work with Republicans and Democrats in the Senate. There's a climate caucus in the House. Newt Gingrich is pushing Republicans in elected office to work on more solutions to climate issues. But when he and Van Jones, who we both know, but Joan knows better, when they were doing Crossfire together, every time they agreed, the producers would come to him and say, stop doing that, it's bad for our ratings. And that's still true. But people are beginning to get tired of the what I call pro wrestling fights, that they're just always making as much noise as possible to get news. And the fact that news in America has the lowest level of trust in any nation, or top 45 nations in the world, according to Pew, there's less trust in America for our news system than any other nation. And the more and more they go for that clickbait and just taking one agenda or the other, or just emphasizing the differences and never dealing with the problems, the more and more their credibility will go down. That's the biggest problem in news media today, is their lack of credibility, or what I say, the lack of trustworthiness. Not that we don't trust them, but they're not worthy of our trust. We're trying to help them and give them tools to be more worthy again and earn back that trust and help us get together and solve problems.
And I'd say it's something even more than unhappy with the news. It's like it's causing people to turn it off because it makes them unhappy, it makes them anxious, it makes them fearful.
My wife can't stand watching it. She's disgusted. And I think I have another problem. I take in too much of it. So I've been trying to have a news diet lately because I realize it's kind of toxic for me. Like, do I really need that one more article about whatever it is? Like, is that making me, and that's kind of a hard thing to have an information budget, a diet, just like, that's enough.
I read a whole book about how it's bad for you to really limit your news intake. So, what does that say?
Listen to more podcasts. That's what I think.
Yes, this is upbeat. This is positive solutions.
And also and to have a little bit of variety, because I think we get on this wheel of like inhaling information, and somehow I feel like the more I know, the better I am, or the more effective, the more I know than you. So, I know more than you. I don't know.
So the question is, as we try and know more so we can persuade our friends, is have you actually persuaded someone that really disagrees with you? Now, persuading people that agree with you is really easy because, they're biased to agree. And
aren't we so smart and virtuous?
Yes.
And that's one of the interesting things about the living room conversations. When we have a conversation that's about a polarized topic, you don't want to get a bunch of people that agree in the room because you come away feeling more extreme about that. You really want to be very intentional about differences in that room. And there are all sorts, depending on the conversation you're having, it can be age differences, it can be cultural differences, it can be political differences, gender differences, it all depends.
And so one thing, what you mentioned just brought up for me, villainization. It's so easy to villainize and raise money. A lot of, Move On raises a lot of money, villainizing so-and-so, or, it's good to raise money. So, Let's talk about villainization, which is part of this polarization, because there are some people in climate world who are villainizing oil companies and like say, oh, you talk to an oil company or you whatever, like you're suspect. Maybe that's back to the purity test. But let's talk about villainization, John. What do you see?
Well, that's a tried and true American entertaining thing to do. I mean, back early days, we've always done that. But there was a difference. Back then, when we had articles written by Ben Franklin or the Tories or Common Sense, they were really, really out there and villainizing each other. Vicious. I mean, we're kind of tame to a lot of the things that they were written back there. But there was a difference then. The difference is that the people reading those articles, first of all, they knew that that was from Ben Franklin and the Tories. So they already knew the point of view of that news. They did not believe that news was somehow accurate. They realized that they were different opinions.
There were party papers.
Yeah. And the time in America, the Walter Cronkite period, where this is the way it is, was really an aberration in history. Most of American history and most of history in all nations I'm aware of have always had kind of partisan different news organizations trying to persuade you. So one thing is that they had a higher level of media literacy, the people who were reading these pamphlets. They understood that what they were reading wasn't necessarily true. And less trust in news is good to some extent, but if we give up on news, then we get our news somewhere else, like social media or random stuff, and that's even worse. So a little bit of news and media literacy is important. The other thing that was different is that if Joan and I were back then in the 1770s, sure, she was reading that rag from the Tories, but she helped me get my plow unstuck from my yard the other day, and we knew each other as people.
Right, yeah.
And that is a huge difference to know people out there. Yeah. And so knowing people outside of our world. When we only know our world, we become really confidently ignorant because we know 10% of the story, and we hear it 8,000 times, so we are absolutely true. We're more confident and less knowledgeable, and we less relationship than others. And that's just a bad combination all around.
We have self-sorted in an amazingly effective way.
Yeah.
And so it's sorting in I live in Berkeley. I can speak about this with great confidence. But where we live, where we get our information in so many ways, and in those places where the mix is, there's a lot of discomfort, and there are a lot of flags people put up so that they can talk about the weather rather than about things that are really meaningful. And that's one reason this is such a good practice. It's not a one-time thing, it's a practice. In faith communities and libraries, communities are saying, okay, we need this because they have found that there are these gaps and people are isolated in all sorts of ways that are not good for us.
It's important at schools too. Kids learn this more quickly, more easily, but it is a big part of why we're so popular in schools. Joan and I did the All Sites for Schools and now Classroom Conversations together. But it's actually a skill to learn how to listen to somebody you disagree with, to really listen to understand, not listen to answer, not to listen to say how they're wrong, but to listen to understand that human being. And it's important, particularly in communities that may be more divided or have great crisis. It's great if you do it beforehand, but when you hit that crisis, we need those skills. These are human skills. Human beings learn this well, but we need the opportunity. We need the tools online in our modern world, where most of the tools are doing the opposite. We need to provide people who want these tools to be able to hear each other and connect better, and we're building those to make that massively available to people.
Right, all the incentives and tools are for transmitting, not for receiving.
That's right. We want to be right. We want everybody to know that I'm right, as opposed to tools for hearing and understanding others and connecting with others.
Before we go to audience questions, I'd like to bring this to a personal level. We've gone through a lot of, in the last couple of years in the American West, wildfires. We're in that are fast moving. We have droughts that are some ways fast, some ways slow. John, as someone who's from Kentucky, how have you personally experienced climate impacts in your own life in the last couple of years, and how have that?
It's interesting because obviously, and we were talking before this show, how in San Francisco there was this time when there were lots of fires, and the smoke from the fires got caught underneath the fog layer of San Francisco, and the world turned sepia tone. This weird off-orange color.
It was a Mad Max day.
Yeah, and you refer to Mad Max for real science fiction geeks like me. The second Outlander movie had this kind of thing, but it was, and I thought that movie wasn't realistic because it could never really look like that. It looked worse than that in walking outside. It was a bizarre world. How much is happening, or what's happening, or how quickly it's happening, what we can do about it, the impact is, I don't know what the impact will be. There is a problem. We do know there's a problem. How big the problem is, what the right solutions are to the problem, is really what I'm focused in. And my personal experience is I'm a philosophy major, so I do tend to get a little bit math-oriented, but like, I want to know the numbers that add up to make things better. And regardless of my personal experience, it's like, I wanted something that works.
And we may have a deal, something that will bend those curves and make it different. Joan, how have you experienced climate disruption in your life personally?
Well, John, I mean, those fires were just stunning. And I was born locally, as I mentioned, so I'm not good with heat. I wilt. It's not, when we had 100 degrees and it was 6 p.m., I was going, this is not where I live. And there's a place in the Sierras that I have a really close connection to. There was a wind event over a year ago that took out all the amazing Jeffrey pines. There were 3 sentinel Jeffreys that all the pines, the ones that were healthiest, were blown down because they had full sails. And now I see them when I go there and they're on the ground. These are trees that are 700, 800 years old. Yeah, it's very, I'm so grateful for the beautiful days we're having here right now and watching the fog. It hurts to see, the trees that are suffering, the droughts, I'm grateful when we have a rainy day because I'm hopeful that more of those trees are going to survive that are, I'm watching everything struggling. I probably get to the hills 5 days out of 7 in a week because that's the way I stay grounded and able to continue to work at what sometimes seems impossible.
Yeah.
But we can do this.
We can. Thank you. We're going to go to our audience questions and invite Patrick, Sean Clark, and Ken Hart to come. Patrick, Sean, and Ken to come up to the microphone there, right there, and welcome you to share your question for Joan and John.
Thank you for the talk. You seem to suggest that there was an agreement on the interestingly named Inflation Reduction Act, at least up there on the stage. And yet it appears by most prognosticators saying that not a single Republican will vote for it, and thus the concern with Sinema's vote. And so I'm wondering if, that maybe you're in a bubble with your rose-colored glasses on up there. There's a lot of agreement up there on the stage, but the reality is that they can't even agree on a really good package.
Being the Republican on stage, I'll go there. I'm not sure how it's going to turn out, and I'm not sure if it's the best bill or not. I do think that naming it the Inflation Reduction Act was kind of rude, practically. I mean, it was talking about speaking the language of the other side. That kind of is not the best name. I'm not sure what's going to happen there. I do think that, like, if you look at the Obamacare, there was a moment when the negotiations were going on, and Patrick Moynihan, Democrat from New York, is in New York, right, was saying, we never make major changes in the United States that last unless you get people on both sides. And there's an opportunity where the left could actually take on some of the suggestions from the moderate Republicans, and they didn't. And then the moderate Republicans didn't vote for that. So whether you blame the left or blame the right, I'm not sure what the correct answer is. we didn't solve that. We didn't reach to the other side to get the solution. Usually when you have one side create something and say, okay, other side, do it, they haven't gone through the work of getting there. I mean, it was a great debate between different sides of the Democratic Party. Okay, Democratic Party, we decide what's right. Okay, Republicans agree with us. I'm not sure if that's the best approach.
But you think there's some good stuff in this bill.
I do think there is some good stuff. Like I mentioned, one thing I thought was good. I don't know what's going to happen there. I don't know how it's going to go. And I'm not sure what the right answer is. There are things in the bill I did like. It was one of the few bills I've seen suggest that actually reduce the deficit as opposed to increasing it.
Yeah.
If it works out that way, there are some assumptions that are questionable. Often when government spends more money, inflation goes up. That's just what happens historically.
Right.
And so there are some...
The deficit reduction part of it seems more certain than the inflation reduction part.
That's right. And, even and I think that the deficit reduction is probably in there. I've seen in California where we've tried to reduce the deficit and actually went up because the impact that those taxes and things had on the economy. So things aren't as clear as they may be advertised as. I don't know what's going to happen. I do know after Joan and I was there in person, Joan was in there remotely, we did meet with a group in Congress, the Select Committee on the Modernization of Congress. And they were interested in how to actually come up with systems to use internally to get the left and the right to talk with each other more often, to listen to each other, and actually to understand what their voters really want. People don't recognize how hard it can be for a politician of goodwill to actually understand what their people really want, because all they can hear is the really loud noise and the really well-funded expert lobbyists and all that. They have trouble finding out what real people need. When they have a town hall, all the people with big money and all the angry people yell. And so we're actually developing, proposing to them ways so they can actually find out what their constituents really want. It's not as simple as just one issue.
And I can say I really don't have rose-colored glasses about politics. It's a very toxic environment.
I think people are going to lead the solution, not the politicians.
And
once we get enough people, politicians will follow, and that's what always happens no matter what they make it look like.
Yeah, the idea that no heroes are going to solve this. Sean.
Hi. I had a question for Joan. At the beginning, you opened about talking about fracking and when you went and to look at fracking because you had different facts. But did you find a common ground? Did you discover why the two of you had different facts?
I learned a lot. We came up with a really good set of questions that we thought needed to be answered by experts on the right and left in a facilitated process so that communities could then have transparency about, what they needed to think about and what they needed to be talking about. But we never had resources to go that next step. So it was a good start that never went the distance.
Yeah, that's a pity because it's very contentious and also very important.
I would love for it to go the rest of the way, but that, requires people wanting to really make it happen. And it would be hard to do, to get trusted experts on the right in the same room with trusted experts on the left and really facilitate like heck to have clear answers to these 10 or so questions about fracking. But they're I think they're the right questions, which I think is really important. So we got a piece of the puzzle.
Yeah, and so much of fracking depends on particular water tables and geology. It's like it can be very site-specific.
Well, it's also, some think there's all sorts of damage to the water, and others say there's no way there's going to be any damage. Some say the chemicals that are being put in are harmless. They're just like you put in ice cream, and other people say it's toxic.
Right.
It's like the difference in facts.
Halliburton's working on a green frac fluid. There's all, but that's measurable, but costs money. Let's go to our last question. Welcome.
Hi, John, you were talking about the gas tax, and I'm thinking in terms of only looking at it as a very narrow problem, and the easy solution obviously is, do away with the gas tax. But then these problems seem to be like fractals. The closer you look, the more things there are. And so assuming that you need to have the money that's collected from that to rebuild roads, to fund particular projects, would you support higher taxes for the well-to-do and, the rich in order to pay for these things, in order to make it a more progressive system and take the burden off of the people who don't have the money?
Yeah. I'm a bit weird in that I really don't think my personal policies are that interesting. For me, on that, just because being open, I'm not sure. I would have to look at the whole picture. I'm not kind of an extremist or no ever or yes for sure. I generally, personally, look for, I find some best solutions, even in climate change, are not always government-led. There's been a lot of, sometimes a lot of the progress we made in reducing pollutants in the air was actually by gas prices going down to replace coal. And I am one of those people, I know this is controversial, who thinks that's part of the solution. I think there are lots of things that are in the solution. So I don't really know, and I'm not good at being an expert on the details of a hypothetical. But I'm certainly not one way or the other. I'm not never do this, never do that. When I decided to focus, and I did work in politics way back when, but what I decided to focus on is enabling people to make better decisions by hearing each other and understanding it better. I think that's my best opportunity for helping, whether it's a climate or things that I care very much about, like homelessness, or how so much of the inequities in society are driven by an education system that will not change. And those I find to be, those are things I've cared for about a long, long time. I've become more interested in climate change through my relationship with Joan, just like Jacob, the friend she was mentioning from Utah. But I'm not sure about that specific possibility. I'm open to different things. I do want to have those things challenged from different perspectives, from different experts, and we'll make the best decision we can.
That's a very politic answer.
Yeah, well, yeah, but it's kind of like I don't know the answer. I mean, I will say I'm not no new taxes personally, but I'm not running for office either. My goal is to have people able to make decisions, not to decide for them. There are plenty of people on this planet who will tell you what they think about everything. We don't need more pundits telling us what the right answer is. I am not interested in being another pundit who's telling everybody exactly what they should do on this issue or not. We have more than enough of those. We need somebody to stand up for regular people to enable them to decide for themselves and to relate with each other. And that's what I'm focused on.
We have to wrap it there. I'd like to give a shout out to the Commonwealth Club and Climate One teams for making this happen. Spencer, Mark, Dan, Megan, Brad, and Sarah Catherine. Thank you for making this happen. You're a great team. On Climate One today, we've been discussing Bridging the Great American Divide with Joan Blades, co-founder of Living Room Conversations, and John Gable, co-founder of allsides.com. Podcasts of this and other Climate One shows are available wherever you get your podcasts. And talking about climate can be hard. It also can be fun and interesting and soothing and affirming. So help us get people talking more about climate by giving us a rating or review. And you can join us right here with podcaster turned investor Molly Wood on September 7th. Thanks for joining us, and thanks to John and Joan for joining us. Thank you all.
Thank you. That's awesome.
Thank you.
Thank you. Well done.
Oh, handshake.